Hello, welcome to the John Hewitt Digital Festival of Literature and Ideas. And this evening we have the first of two major poetry events in the festival's programme, Gallery Goes. My name is Nessa O'Mahony and I'm a poet and a member of the John Hewitt International Summer School Subcommittee. But for the coronavirus and the cancellation in March of the 33rd John Hewitt International Summer School, this event would have taken place at the Marketplace Theatre in Armagh last Tuesday. But thanks to funding from the Arts Council of Northern Ireland and Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council, the John Hewitt Society was able to regroup and present a truncated virtual version of the summer school as the John Hewitt Digital Festival of Literature and Ideas. So during this week, there have been 5 very popular writing workshops, some of which were supported by the Open University. And today saw the start of the 3-day festival programme. The Gallery Press is 50 this year and is recognised at home and abroad as one of Ireland's leading publishers of poetry and drama in the 21st century. With the support of the Arts Council of Ireland's touring grant, Gallery Press has presented Gallery Goes at various festivals and art centres throughout Ireland. This evening's event is a poetry reading and discussion with Tom French, Vona Groarke and Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin. Each will read for 15 minutes and I'll introduce each of them in turn. There'll be a little time at the end for some questions and answers. So our first reader will be Tom French. Tom was born in Kilkenny in 1966. He graduated from NUI Galway and the University of Limerick. He's received bursaries in literature from the Arts Council of Ireland in 1999 and 2009, and his work was awarded the inaugural Ted McNulty Prize. He was a recipient of the Dermot Healy Award in 2015 and the O'Shaughnessy Award for Poetry in 2016. He lives with his family close to the coast of County Meath, where he earns his living in the County Library Service. He has published 6 collections of poetry with Gallery Press. His first, Touching the Bones, was published in 2001, was awarded the Forward Prize for Best First Collection in 2002. And according to reviewer John McAuliffe, its central long poem, Pity the Bastards, sounded like Patrick Kavanagh and Allen Ginsberg. His next collection was The Fire Step, 2009, which was followed by Midnight's Town in 2014. In a review of that book, Katrina O'Reilly said that the narrative tone of a Tom French poem is immediately recognisable, detached but sympathetic, sensuously nostalgic, watchful, alert to the serendipities of time, place and logos. Midnight's Town was followed by The Way to Work in 2016, and The Last Straw in 2018, which was shortlisted for the Irish Times Poetry Now Award in 2019. His most recent collection, The Seafield, was published in April 2020. Reviewing it recently in the Irish Times, Sean Hewitt said it is deeply rooted and attendant to histories of both place and language. And he goes on to say, French has a metrical elegance and a subtle attention to rhymes and etymologies that make these poems sing. And we will listen to some of Tom French's music now.
Thanks very much, Nessa. I could have listened to that all day. I'm going to repeat history by reading a poem of John Hewitt's that I'm a fan of, that I read a few years ago in Armagh, when I had the pleasure of reading with Kieran Carson and Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin. Because I paced my thought. Because I paced my thought by the natural world, the earth organic, renewed with the palpable seasons, rather than the city falling ruinous, slowly by weather and use, swiftly by bomb and argument. I found myself alone who had hoped for attention. If one listened a moment, he murmured his dissent. This is an idle game for a cowardly mind. The day is urgent. The sun is not on the agenda. And some who hated the city and man's unreasoning acts, remarked, "He is no ally." He does not say that power and hate are the engines of human treason. There is no answering love in the yellowing leaf. I should have made it plain that I stake my future on birds flying in and out of the schoolroom window, on the counsel of sunburnt comrades in the sun, and the picture carried with singing into the temple. I remember going out to read that poem in Armagh and suggesting to Kieran Carson that I might read a John Hewitt poem, and he said to me, "Aye, what one have you got in mind?" And I told him, and he said, "Aye, that one will do." So the other poem, before I get to the Seafield, I wanted to read a birthday poem for Michael Longley, who's celebrating a big birthday at the end of this month. And coincidentally, this morning, I discovered in Hewitt's own volume, Mosaic, he has a lovely little poem for Longley where he describes him as the laughing bearded man, genial, witty, fond of jazz. And my birthday poem for him, remembers a reading about 10 years ago where I had the pleasure of reading poems with Michael, and he remarked on our two faces on a poster outside the Arts Centre. A detour from Michael Longley. We have broadcast our voices to an empty room and received the sound technicians all clear. Then composed ourselves on low chairs around a fruit bowl, wine glasses filled with water. When the tannoy sounds, we will make our way. Father Christmas in front, then Errol Flynn. Through corridors in straggly single file, between floor manager and tranquil MC. Like dead men walking or a raiding party. All we are short of is a tot of rum. Having shed our bulky kit to travel light and bearing only spectacles and paper, we pause between the simple present tense and the auditorium's near-death experience for what you call, Michael, a little tinkle, and hold the fire doors for the next in line. So I thought I would avail of the opportunity this morning to read, particularly from this book, a poem or two sonnets from the end of a sequence from my daughter, Grace. She's not too delighted about the poems at all, really, to be honest. She was 12 when I started them and she's 14 now. So I'm going to get away. She's not in the audience. So the last two poems from this are two sonnets. Invocation. Nearly Easter, and still they're giving snow. Glued to the forecast, while I light the stove, her face lights up when her county is named, in the list of counties where a warning's in force. And people are advised to keep in store blankets, food, a tank of fuel, a charged phone, to keep an eye on elderly neighbours. Last week, she looked out at the trampoline on what a flurry had left and thought aloud, that's a blanket. Isn't that a blanket? For all that's said, when she wakes, the earth is still green. She is learning to withhold hope as the sky withholds its snow. It is coming. Every fibre of her being says, from miles away. Swan. I didn't even know what I was then, let alone what it was I wanted to become. I had no way of knowing, and the time to be sent to big school had not yet come. When they asked what I wanted to be, I was so young, I answered, a swan. I must have seen one in a picture book. Invisible ripples, feathers unruffled, and being struck by its grace and thought, whatever that is what I want to be. That wish for grace, the swan I wanted to become, becomes my wish for you. That your wish to be beautiful, we named you grace, never strike you, love, as strange. There's a poem in the early part of the book about a tiny little body of water in North County Meath called Loch Rua. And what prompted the poem was speaking to a relation of the man in the poem. And she said, it was like he never lived. Loch Rua. He left the house on Friday as he used, to go cailing. Then they could get no trace. The whistle and fiddle, he'd passed his nights teaching himself to play or where he slept. He'd only left the home place once before. A week in the town cured him of the town. Their holding hadn't work enough for two, so he did rough work for neighbours around. He had innocent ways about him. He'd let bicycles he owned go for less than he'd paid, and came home once with paintings on the train. Yet he could talk as solid as any man, and never got down on his knees in the fields, but prayed at home and took his time at it, and always wore the beads they found on him. An article of clothing led them to the lake. When they took him from the deep place, he'd no weeds in his hands, nor none in his mouth. Those waters are known yet to have a cure, because of the battle that reddened those shores. A person of the opposite sex must take a jar of water stopped with moss and not look back. Maybe what he found there was a cure too. There are no charms to be said, and no prayers. In the book that came out before this one, I developed a great affection for public houses and started to write poems that were set in them. And it seems to have continued into this book. So I thought I'd read a few of those. The sequence here is called Closing Time, and it begins with one based on a painting titled A View of the Inn at Laytown, County Meath, which was painted by William Sadler the Younger. Take down the satellite dish, the Sky Sports sign, the extension that came with the smoking ban. Add thatch and the chimney. Put a strange name over the door and make it impossible to decipher. Include some moon, but draw the line at stars. Paint with a handful of strokes, strand and sea. Overlook the road that won't be built for a century. In the hand of the man nearest the door, place a shaft that could be a spear or an oar or a winnowing fan, brought in for safety. Give him a thirst that sea causes and thoughts of the best that they can hope for, being music, rum, the grace of being in out of this wind make closing time when all the songs are sung. There's one titled The Judge and Jury, Market Street, and it has a little epigraph that says, on the occasion of the 120 years of local government exhibition at Trim District Courthouse, which took place on Holy Thursday of last year. The man up the ladder across the street, painting the judge and jury a bright green, and practicing a kind of democracy himself, is managing not to get killed as he crosses all morning to Paddy Powers to lay bets on handicaps and maiden stakes, and will miss the actor engaged to grow a beard and dress in the style of the past to speak of the future and say inalienable, conscientious justice. The minutes that look as fresh as the day they were written because they're kept in the dark. The vitrines commissioned for 1916 and borne in singly like children's coffins. The things blown up to show how far we've come, that will need by close of business to be gone. And I'll finish with these two. I'm in Navan, and on Watergate Street, there is a pub that is known now as the 41, which is just across from the town hall where a memorial was put up just last year to the 138 men of the town who went to the war. The 41 Watergate Street. The council is taking away the clay to pave the space in front of the stone, so people do not get their shoes destroyed when they come to stand and read the names of the men of the town who went to the war. The ones who made it home, who knew what it meant to suck pebbles in a landscape of poisoned wells and bones, used to drink here. Their thirst was deep. It was unquenchable. This premises was known as the Dardanelles. And the last one is, the title of this one is Ma Murphy's in Bantry. And if you have the good fortune to be there, it's a hostelry that's well worth spending a little bit of time in, particularly for the snug. Nobody is ever going to find us here, where we take the weight off the floor and bide our time over half ones and pinches of snuff, while our life's messages are totted up. We are sitting where the matchmaker sat, before the parties to the matches he made, at a table fixed to the earth, at a hatch, in a door through which neat spirits pass. This wallpaper has seen all come and go, because it is almost a century old. What comes from the General Motors fridge will be cold the way nothing on earth is cold, because they leave the Christmas tinsel up. It is always Christmas in Ma Murphy's snug. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tom, and thanks particularly for reminding us what the experience of being in a pub is, given that many of us down south here in Ireland anyway won't be seeing the inside of one anytime soon.
I know.
So
I've just made myself very sentimental there to think about that.
Thank you so much.
Not at all, it's a pleasure.
So our next reader is Vona Groarke. Vona was born in the Irish Midlands in 1964, a great year. I was born then too. She attended Trinity College Dublin and University College Cork. She's a member of Eiléan and was selected as a Cullman Center Fellow at the New York Public Library in 2018-19, and she currently teaches in the Center for New Writing at the University of Manchester. Awards include the Hennessy Award, the Brendan Behan Memorial Prize, the Michael Hartnett Award, the Strokes Down Prize, and the Stand Magazine Poetry Prize. In 2017, she received the Hennessy Hall of Fame Award for an outstanding contribution to literature. She's published 7 collections with the Gallery Press. Her first was Shale in 1994, and writing of that in Poetry Ireland Review, Anthony Roach said that the poems reveal a strikingly original poetic sensibility, rich enough to inhabit 100 empty rooms. In her review of Vona's Other People's Houses from '99, Rita Kelly said, "This is a kind of poetry which echoes back through the poetry we know well, the poetry which has left an impression upon the brain as it was." Her next collection, Flight, 2002, was shortlisted for the Forward Prize and the Michael Hartnett Award in 2003. Her Selected appeared in 2016, and reviewing that, Afric McGlinchey said, "The adjective that best describes Groarke's work as a whole is transcendent. Even in the midst of grief, she manages to leave the shadows behind and to keep instead the remembered light." Of her most recent collection, Double Negative, which was published last year, Martina Evans writes that Groarke's fine lyricism and sharp wit are present as never before, the humour more mordant, the vision darker. Yet the poems are so exact and fine, it is an exhilarating read. And I'm sure we'll exult in each of the poems that Vona will read for us now.
Thanks very much, Nessa. It's really nice to be here in whatever capacity this is. I'm not really sure, but I believe I'm here anyway, and I believe you're there. I'm going to read a few poems, mostly from the last book, Double Negative, but I'll throw in something else towards the end. I'm going to start with a poem that's a small homage to the foregone decencies and delicacies of the world I grew up in. It wasn't all decencies, of course, and there's much about 1960s and 70s Ireland that most of us are glad to see the back of, but let's account gently for the niceties too, chief amongst which I count the doily, that signifier of hospitable delicacy, that magical object designed to translate the ordinary taking of tea into a ritual a Japanese imperial tea room could only aspire to. No one uses doilies anymore. So why do I hold the word to the window? So the holes in the pattern are years ago, and a visitor has come. Impossible to talk of the mart or Qatar, as though days, clumps and clods of them, could be glamoured by a paper doily placed nicely on a plate. Here, so, for this poem only, is its wheel of stars and star-shaped flowers, an inkling of words as ornaments, the way stars and, yes, flowers are. But lest you think me soft-headed, I feel the need to follow that poem with one that recognises some of what I'm sure we're very glad to see the back of. In this case, it's the pre-feminism whittling back of women's lives to disappointment, poverty and domestic drudgery. Against nostalgia. Beryl, Shirley, Doris, Gail, names that fell like coins between floorboards, or pins for hairdos past the height of fashion even then. All lost, all unaccounted for, except on this wayward Sunday hour, their bosoms shoring up the gallery wall. Oh, you women with your private shillings and songs smuggled out of your young day into mint green kitchens with lino floors, a soda loaf cooling on a wire rack, the fire set first thing for evening, and a place for everything. Oh, you women with your bunions and bills, your horn-rimmed spectacles and missing back teeth, your handbags and small change and single key. Oh, you women in your fur-collared coats, counting on them to remember your bodies as your bodies remember your lives. Oh, what did you think the days were for, that lodged like pips in the flesh of your throats, as if you were, somehow, fruit? Here's another of these against poems that pepper Double Negative, my last book, and that operate as a kind of rebuke or corrective to the other non-against poems there. The book straddles the positive and negative, moving in and out of personal and more objective perspective, jumping out of narrative straight lines to tell small stories in a sidelong, possibly even wayward fashion, coming at the story not head on, but slyly and, I hope, surprisingly. Against anxiety. A cartoon rider on a horse so real it shits and stalls and rears against the rider it's been saddled with in this narrative, who wonders, of course, if he's been here before, but nobody, not the old-timer in the sun chair, nor the woman stock still in her parked car, not even the dog who stares him down, bids him time of day. The horse comes not to care. There will be hay, or else there won't. Either way, he's a horse still tomorrow. The rider knows nothing about tomorrow. He moves on, colour and storyline, to the next bit of road, and the next, past fury, exhaustion, and bafflement, as he drags with his ears a shaft of light from a moon he thinks is real. I suppose that's the thing about cartoons. Everyone sees the punchline coming, except the one who's about to get punched. And now for a very modern poem, or at least a poem about a very modern predicament. It's set over the course of 1 week and has two characters. Well, not exactly characters in that I couldn't tell you what colour their socks are or what accents they speak in. They're more exemplars than characters. Stereotypes, I suppose you could say. A week in the life of Dick and Jane, who met on the internet. Sunday, on which we meet them powering down their overly heartfelt screens. Monday, he wonders if reserve or abandon would be less of a cliche. She tells him no man has touched her this year, except for Mahler, of course. Tuesday, his hand, her hand, their hands. They are trying on togetherness the way they would a cloche or bowler in a charity shop. Wednesday, he imagines skylights. She remembers rain. See how they plan to make it work, their glittery, foolproof plan. Thursday, they play tennis. No, they don't. They agree, as if lying on a bed of leaves, that metaphor will be no use to them when it comes down to it. Friday, they decide to eat only yellow food. On their 4th banana each, they admit they lack imagination, acknowledge the need for their bodies to hike some other compromise. Saturday, what shall we do with Dick and Jane? Shall we cluster just so in a happy ending? Or shall we back out, line by line, like a butler having delivered the telegram to a breathless drawing room? Sometimes you find a bit of language and you know that it just has to be the title of a poem. And the only problem then is assembling the poem to come in after it. This next one is a narrative poem, and you can be sure of this because one character in the poem has a limp and the other is bald. But it's also a lyric poem, thinking about what's to be done with one's past, one's burdensome, capacious, and greedy past. Self-storage. When I send my past to the lockup in 15 numbered see-through boxes that 2 men lug down 5 flights and hoist into an unmarked van, I should feel released, sprung from a 25-year sentence played out backwards, sent down at the end, right before the bad thing happens, but after the time has been served. And I nearly do. I do. I commit myself to month after month, paid in advance, and they hand me 2 sets of keys to a padlock they promise to secure once I'm inside. In drizzle, as the past must be, the man with the limp secures the back, while the bald one has me sign, says he will text the unit number so I know where I am. The bedroom closes over where the boxes used to be, and the mirror has me in it, or what's left of me, sitting down to this clean white slate with my news and news and news. Another of these against poems, this time against something I suspect has been prowling the land for the past 4 months. Of course, since it's a poem against loneliness, I needed to finish with an image of togetherness, of company keeping. Happily for my poem's purposes, the word loneliness, which you'll notice has a single I at its core, concludes with identical letters that I imagine in italicized presentation, squishing up together, spooning, almost like lovers. Against loneliness. Time was, the rain brought nasturtiums like a lover, but now is not August anymore, and the rain comes empty-handed, which is fine by me. There are so many flowers already, so many spoons and shoes and candlesticks to be accounted for. I make lists for company of all the objects in the world that bloom the way nasturtiums do, loudly, brazenly. The rain doesn't care so much for lists. Tonight it calls by the house late with something important to say. Its words end in old double letters that lean in like italics, close to each other, so nothing comes between. Here's a poem about middle age. Has that for a snazzy opener. It's much too heavy a topic to be handled heavily, so this time I come at it through metaphor, which seemed with its gaps and jumps and surprising equations to be a fit and supple way to come at such a stiff-limbed and awkward proposition. The old country. I came out of that country with one suitcase crammed with newspaper, seeds in every fold. No, that's not it. No seeds and no newspaper. My suitcase was full of snow and the shadow of snow, which is another way of saying it was full of lies. I had been there for years, whole months of them. And then, just like that, words stopped calling on me. Street signs flipped inside out. My neighbors swapped faces. The blue door was, by nightfall, paler blue. On clean days, hail pockmarked the pillows. I try not to picture it, or to calculate heartbeats, blood I bled, rooms undressed, ways of waking up, ounces in an ounce of love. I am scattering ink-white ashes as I write. You live a day, and it passes through you like a ghost on the landing. And sometimes I think there is no landing, and the ghost cannot be me. Speaking of ghosts, I thought I'd read a little from the opening of my version of Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin's Lament for Art O'Leary, which was published in 2008 and was reprinted earlier this year to coincide with the opera of the same name by the wonderful composer Irene Buckley. Unfortunately, it was a COVID casualty. It had been due to premiere in the Everyman in Cork at the end of April. Irene's extraordinary score has a ghostly quality to it. It's haunting and yet passionate, if you can have a passionate ghost. I hope that it will get to be performed some other time to become real and embodied, so you can hear the beauty of Irene's take on a poem that haunts Irish poetry, even Irish poetry in the English language, I think, with its howl of fury and desire. I'm just going to read from the start of it, a little bit that's in the voice of Eiléan, who has recently heard the news of her husband's murder and is remembering him and when they first met. It's from Lament for Art O'Leary. Husband, when you stood out that market day, my eyes settled on you. I knew I would have you if it meant stepping out of my whole life, carrying nothing with me. Not that that mattered anyway. You led me through rooms that whitened as we walked, had a blaze of comfort stoked for me whenever I desired. You shook out your house for me, had bedrooms chastened and kitchens stacked. You had mackerel hooked for me, lambs fattened on silky grass for me, loaves shaped like the sun and moon for me, and women on hand to see to it all, to pour and knead and clean. All I had to do was turn over in my hand-spun nets of sleep. My dear, I picture you with sunlight tied around your head like a band of gold, every crease and angle of you, from your silver-hilted sword to your fine-trimmed mount, a compliment to that spring day and what it had to offer you. Even the English lowered their eyes from the vision of you on your foreign horse. Not that that mattered in the end. It wasn't their eyes that undid you. You were every inch the heir of the Earls of Antrim and the upright Barrys of Imokilly, but you were still the footloose suckling calf that had warmed my breast that morning. My white-gloved horseman, I'd have watched you forever, in your cambric and laces, your worsted and leather, your hand-stitched shoes and your Austrian breeches that showed off your sleek, powerful thighs astride the brown mare that was a match for you in vigour and elegance. My soft-fingered art, the light glinting off your golden brooch, reached me all the way over the sea. And when you followed in your finery, I thought that self-same blaze of yours would blind even the English in our streets. Not that it mattered in the end. It wasn't their eyes that undid you. So that's just from the opening of it. The rest of the poem, which I think, as I say, most people will have as a kind of a touchstone basis for their understanding of the Irish poetic tradition, continues. It has been likened also to a howl of grief in the sense of a confessional howl that we would be more familiar with from people like Allen Ginsberg, but I think it is an extraordinary grafting on of personal articulation and poetic tradition. And now in its most recent iteration, of which I'm only one fleeting part as well, but in its most recent iteration is now again to be sung in Irene's opera. I'm going to finish it with another of these against poems, and this time it's concerning disappointment, because we have to resist disappointment ultimately, don't we? It's a bird poem, sort of, and a bit of a mystery. Against disappointment. The pigeon that ousted the missel thrush on my winter balcony, who dropped me runs of speckled song in return for handful of crumbs. This pigeon, for all my knocking and shooing, thinks he owns the place. He is waiting for me to leave out bread, and I'm waiting for him to be a missel thrush. That's the way of it these days. I could crack the code if I knew what it meant. But what would I do then? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vona. That's wonderfully resonant poems, and you're absolutely right. There's, I think, going to be so much pent-up creativity that when it is finally unleashed again, I don't know how we're going to manage ourselves, because there'll be just so much to absorb. But thank you for a wonderful reading. Our final reader, and it's hard to believe it's already at the final reader stage, is Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin. Eiléan was born in Cork City and educated there and at Oxford before spending her working life as an academic in Trinity College, Dublin. She was a founder member of Ciphers, a literary journal. She's won the Patrick Kavanagh Award, the Irish Times Award for Poetry, the O'Shaughnessy Award, which called her among the very best poets of her generation, and the International Griffin Poetry Prize. Eiléan is a fellow and professor of English Emeritus at Trinity College Dublin and a member of Eistáine. She was Ireland Professor of Poetry between 2016 and 2019. Her collections include The Girl Who Married the Reindeer in 2001, The Sunfish in 2009, winner of the 2010 Griffin International Poetry Prize, Writing of the Boys of Blue Hill from 2015 in The Guardian. Critic Angela Clare said, "These poems' routines around in the past do not come at the expense of an engagement with the modern world. On the contrary, they are exercises in historical memory, providing invaluable points of entry into the larger forces that shape our lives today." And reviewing her most recent collection, The Mother House, in 2019, Martina Evans described Ní Chuilleanáin's distinctive, uncanny door to history. Matthew Sweeney once wrote of her that no one else in poetry or poetry elsewhere is writing like this. Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin is a unique voice, or as Tom McCarthy put it, we will never again have a poetic mind like Ní Chuilleanáin's available to us at any other time in literature. Her sensibility is unique, her society and her place in it will never be seen again. So let's listen to her now.
Thank you very much, Nessa. And it's wonderful actually to be looking at all of you, to be seeing other poets together in this slightly peculiar experience. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I'm going to read mostly from this book, which is called The Mother House. It was my attempt to revisit and partly to make sense of my childhood in the city of Cork, the ancestral figures that I encountered there within my own family, in this general surroundings, who were all nuns. And the first poem I'm going to read is about the foundress figure, Nessa O'Mahony, the 18th century philanthropist, who set up illegal schools for Catholic children in the city of Cork. She was breaking the law by doing so, but she was also resisting the tendency of the Roman Catholic Church, which would have liked to get all women safely inside convents. And she, on the other hand, was a figure in the street. Somebody around that time wrote, "Perfect enclosure is not possible in Ireland." And so this poem is called An Imperfect Enclosure. For Nessa O'Mahony. She was out in all weathers. She was tired. Someone gave her a chair in a shop, rested, and then away, in the street, on the move. The house she built first, giving on the street. Could she close up doors and windows on that side? It would be noticed as a convent. She asked to be buried in the common cemetery. They broke through the wall of the nuns' graveyard and slipped her coffin inside. But she would not stay, so they built her a stone tomb nearer to Cove Lane and opened a latch at one end so hands can touch the coffin. Like the decision to marry, the decision to enter a convent is always a story. And the nuns that I knew when I was a child all had this story of the moment when they decided that this was what they were going to do. But one of the strangest stories I was told by, as the folklorists say, a normally truthful person. And it's called She Was at the Haymaking. She was down in the small field, turning the last swathes of hay on the slope facing the river mouth. Each time she came back up, she saw the wave so gently courting the land with shallow pushes, and the curved edge of the tide making its way upstream. She was alone in the field. They were up in the house with Mary, whose bag was packed, waiting for the car to bring her on the first stage, the start of her long voyage away to the far shores of America and the novitiate. She worked on with the rake, thinking of the rolling wave, an eye watching for the car. When she heard it on the road, she brought the rake up with her on the steep path to the house. They were all there in the parlour, Mary sitting in the middle, her face amazed. I can't go. Now that it's time, I can't go. Her parents said nothing. Her sister had come to bid her goodbye. Now she said, so I'll go. She shook a small bit of hay out of her hair. She washed her hands. She took up the bag and went off with the driver to a house full of rules, so far away that when she wrote to say she was happy, the letter took 3 weeks crossing the sea. I'm going to read a more recent poem, which will be in my collected poems, which come out, I hope, this year. It's called Her Work, and it's written for the sculptor Janet Mallarney, who died a couple of months ago. She died in Italy, and that's where I mostly knew her. I didn't ever really know her very well, but what always struck me very forcibly about the relationship between her and her work was that it seemed as if she had actually passed into the material that she was shaping in sculpture. And it seemed as if the material had passed into her in some strange way. Her works were all very individual, very striking, very unexpected in strange ways. This is a fairly quiet one. The image that's on the cover of the mother house, it's called Giotto's Circle. But there you can see the female figure and how it seems to continue into the line that she's drawing on the floor. Her work for Janet Mallarney. Just shadows, like all that we create. One of them flaunts a core of bright red, exposed. It is the lining of a mouth, surprised, gasping, shaking. Then who knows what others might hide, those deft shadows that dive and pounce for a place to land. At first, she can only guess their form as distance shrinks and multiplies them right until the last place they finish. But she catches them, her grip shaping, measuring, pressing the fertile twist, a new life captured against the light. As a child, make dolls obey her call. The stuff she holds shudders, yields, and warps into a word, and now in focus, no longer looks like a talking bird. Handled and human, the color scuffed, a female head, eloquent, angry. She'll never wash all that stain away. The colors have spread under her nails, her hands dipped deeper, wet with shadows. This poem is again about Cork, and again it's about a house that I think of as probably the remains of a convent, but a convent that has a secret. The merchants of Cork didn't engage in the slave trade, I'm glad to say, but they did sell butter and beef to the slave ships on their way from France to the Caribbean. The poem is called Carr's Lane. You can see the tall front door, but don't expect to be admitted. On your left is Carr's Lane, at the corner a newspaper shop. Up the lane a doorway, steps worn pale by rain and people climbing, unlocked at the agreed time on quiet days for callers they know. Scholars disagree about Carr's Lane. Is it Cart's Lane corrupted? Or was there a prosperous local merchant family called Carr? They could have grown rich selling butter to the transatlantic trade or beef abroad. If their books gave their story, those have all been cleared. The dealer came one Monday early. The shelves were bare before noon. The library is closed off. Dangerous. Woodworm in the floorboards. This poem is called Seaweed, and it was written in 2016 for the 100th anniversary of the marriage of my grandparents, who were married on Easter Sunday. They then proceeded to the Imperial Hotel, which was in O'Connell Street, because they knew what was going to happen. And my grandmother had an eloquent description of how she looked out the window, looking through broken glass, and saw her brother Joseph for the last time. But I wanted in this poem to say, what was he thinking of? The poem is called Seaweed because he was a professor of chemistry, and in fact, his fascination was with the chemistry of seaweed. For Thomas Dillon and Geraldine Plunkett, married April 23rd, 1916. Everything in the room got in her way. The table mirror catching the smoke and the edges of the smashed window panes. Her angle downward on the scene gave her a view of hats and scattered stones. She saw her brother come out to help with the barricades, the wrecked tram blocking off Earl Street, then back inside. And for the man in the room, obscured by her shadow against the window, the darkening was a storm shifting his life. He wondered, where were they now, and would this perch above the scene blow apart soon? And he imagined the weeds that sink their filaments between rocks to nourish a life in water, until all of a sudden they're sheared away to sea. And out at sea, the gunboat was bucking and plunging, throwing up spray. The weeds are slapped back again on sharp rocks beside beaches that are sucked bare by the storm after this one, their holdfast plucked away. He was thinking, would they find a place and lose it, blown away again and find another on the western coast, as the seaweed is landed, a darkness in the dark water. I'm going to read two more poems, one of which is about the whole question of commemoration. Why do we go about and why do we worry so much in this country and indeed in some other countries as well about the whole business of commemorating the past and especially commemorating past wrongs? The poem is called An Informant. When I asked her about the fate of the mission ship sent away so many years ago, and we knew then they'd be lucky to make land, I could see she knew. She couldn't stop talking, but her words sounded foreign. I heard her sigh at last, taking off her gloves, then silently picking up one of the lamps, and she moved to the front door. It was stiff. It hadn't been opened since the last visit of the vicar foreign, but we found the key and pulled it wide. She laid the lamp down in the doorway and looked along the broad walk to the gate that is a roofed arch with an alcove intended for laying down a coffin so the bearers could take a rest. Sighing, lifting the lamp, she carried it down there, and I understood the words she used and what she wanted for the action to be complete, that we would leave it there in the archway until the oil was spent and the lamp died of its own accord. The flame that had flickered pale in the daylight shone steadily in the deep shade of the arch. This is the short form, she said. We must do this at least. This much we owe their names. I'm going to end with a very short poem which I wrote last year on finding my husband's keyring in a drawer in our house in Italy. Keyring. The two little chrome discs between my fingers, happily sliding past each other, both belong on the same keyring, which was yours. One broader than the other, made to match a common coin to be slipped in a shopping trolley. On each of them is written, breast aware. The words are a dull pink, the letters cursive, and the metal shines all the brighter, gleaming to please me, warm now from handling. I want to keep them near me forever. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Elaine. Thank you so much. And really exciting to hear that the collected is coming. It's not going to be delayed a little, do you think, by this silly stuff that's going on at the moment? Or will we get a launch in the autumn, do you think?
I can't tell, really, but I do hope that it'll make it.
We all hope that very much. We have a few minutes, I think, left for maybe one or two questions. And kind of referring back then to that big subject that has been dominating everything for the last while, COVID-19. And because all three of you are poets who have been very strongly associated with writing about space, whether it's interior, domestic, or exterior place, landscape, I was just wondering what the experience has been like for the last 4 months, when there was a period when you were locked into the particular space that you found yourself in March, or whenever that happened for you. Has it made you think differently about space, about place, or not?
I think strangely. I think strangely that the world receded and was more present at the same time. And I found myself during the 4 months missing the sea, because we live close enough to it, but with the 2 kilometer restriction, you could go out and try and hear it some nights, but you couldn't actually see it. So I think that's going to be an abiding thing for a very long time, that experience of missing the sea. It's never happened to me before.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I had the same in Rathfarnham, and the hills were 3.5k away, and I could only go 2k up the road.
Yeah.
So that tantalizing sense of so close yet so far, you know.
Well, strange to put these numbers on our experience of landscape, to say it's 2 kilometers or it's 5 kilometers, or then the bounty of the 20 kilometer release limit. And you know, we've never thought like that, and the poetic mind certainly, I think, doesn't think like that, doesn't be so dogmatic about numbers and about measurements and so on. So all of that was strange and unsettling, I think, and I haven't managed to unshackle the landscape from those measurements that were put on it over the lockdown. I still find myself thinking in terms of 5k or 20k or 10k or whatever it is. So I'm waiting for when all of that dissolves, which will be I think a real release.
I think as poets, we're not like serious prose writers who have to work at home anyway. I'm quite used to being out somewhere and suddenly getting an idea and grabbing an envelope or an old diary or something, and a pub napkin even, and writing something down. It's that casual encounter with the outside world that I miss. I mean, we've been going out now, of course, but always planned and always protected.
And did you find the time productive? I mean, I am whatever the complete antithesis of productivity is. That has been my experience of the last number of months. But I've heard accounts from people who say, no, I've written my next collection. How was it in terms of headspace and ability to write for you three?
Well, I've been doing proofs, so that's the excuse for not writing anything new.
And I don't know what productivity means really. What does it mean? The writing of new work? Does it mean thinking? Does it mean reading? And does it mean putting a big red line through everything you've already done? It could be all of those things. I mean, I've been busy. What it will amount to, if indeed it amounts to anything, I think will only be shown over time, maybe a long time.
I think I learned from the last poem in the Seafield is a chronicle of the drought that happened in 2018. And all I found myself doing was paying attention to anything that seemed to have anything to do with a lack of water and writing it down. So using that kind of approach, I did the same with being forced to stay at home. So I'm in the middle of a chronicle about staying at home.
But the double frustration for you, Tom, is that your book only came out in April. So all of the normal attendant activities to a new book have been taken away, I suppose. So that must be very frustrating.
Well, not really. I'm kind of naturally shy and retiring anyway. So in a way, it suited me perfectly.
Well, it has been a great joy to talk to you all and to listen to the wonderful poems. Just to tell viewers that the Hewitt Digital Festival bookseller is the wonderful No Alibis bookshop in Belfast, and they will very happily, they have in stock poetry collections by each of the three poets, and they'll very happily let you in with a mask or take your order over the phone or via the internet. And the next poetry event at the John Hewitt Digital Festival of Literature will be the Poetry Gala featuring American poet Terence Hayes and Mona Archie. And that takes place at 7:30 tomorrow, Friday, the 31st of July. Later this evening, there is a fantastic fiction event featuring a conversation between Donal Ryan and Michael Hughes, and that's happening this evening at 7:30 p.m. Tomorrow at 5:30, there'll be a conversation between Emer McBride and Jan Carson. And on Saturday, there will be a conversation between Marita Conlon McKenna and Martina Devlin. So just to finish by saying thanks again so much to the fabulous Tom French, Vona Groarke, and Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin for a truly memorable reading. Thank you so much.